Hello, and welcome to our Let's Talk event, a conversation with Hannah Gordon, the Chief Administrative Officer and General Counsel of the San Francisco 49ers. My name is Sonia Naik, and I'm a partner in Nixon Peabody's Community Development Finance Practice Group. I am a co-leader of the New Market Tax Credit team here at Nixon Peabody. And if it isn't clear by my backdrop, I am also a huge 49ers fan. For the past few years, Nixon Peabody has hosted Let's Talk, an event series which showcases dynamic female leaders across all industries by inviting them to speak to them about their career journeys and path to leadership, their ups and downs and key moments that have helped define their careers and ultimately their lives. We have hosted these events previously in our offices as in-person networking events, and now we are very excited to present these series to you on a virtual platform. Before we get to the heart of the program, I'd like to introduce you to Courtney New and Hannah Gordon. Courtney New leads Nixon Peabody's global immigration practice. She represents a wide range of corporate clients, from startups to large multinational companies, on all aspects of U.S. business immigration issues. Courtney will be moderating today's discussion. Hannah Gordon, as I mentioned, is the Chief Administrative Officer and General Counsel of the 49ers. She's been named by the NFL as one of the most influential women in football. Hannah advises on all legal aspects, not only on the team's day-to-day business and operations, but also on those pertaining to Levi's Stadium. Public affairs, strategic communications, risk management, community impact, and fan engagement work are all on her daily to-do list. Gordon is a presidential leadership scholar and one of Silicon Valley's Business Journal's 100 Women of Influence. She is the author of Season of Change, the competitor's playbook for joy on the path to victory. This book is an 8-week guided journal to develop the vision, the game plan, and the mental toughness to be a winner. The book comes out in November, and it's going to be a great holiday gift. Gordon earned her bachelor's from UCLA and her JD from Stanford. We welcome questions at the end of the session, and to submit a question, just go ahead and type it in the Q&A box, and we will do our best to get to them. We are also recording this webinar, and a recorded link will go out following the end of this event. So without further ado, let's talk. Courtney, take it away.
Thanks, Sonia. Hi, Hannah. Thank you for doing this. Good, how are you?
Pleasure. I'm so glad to be here. I appreciate what a big Niners fan Sonia is. I know that you're a Patriots fan, so we're opponents this week, but it's all good.
Well, thank you for taking the time. It's really fun to do this because usually when you and I are talking, it's shop. And so now I get to ask you all my burning questions. And some from the audience too, because we had some people submit questions in advance, so we'll get to as much as we can. So first question for you, Sonia summarized a little bit what, your current role is, but what is a day in the life of Hannah Gordon these days?
Well, these days is definitely different than a day in the life 7 months ago. 7 months ago, I would tell you, I was jumping from plane to plane, going different places, running from business meeting to business meeting in the morning. If I was home, I would get up, go to the facility, work out at our gym, grab breakfast in the cafeteria, talk to the cafeteria staff, run home and shower, come back to the office. None of that, of course, happens now. Like all of you, I've been locked in my house for 7 months. And the work, though, is still the same, right? We are still putting on football games. Hopefully, all of you are still watching them on television. As with a lot of content, ratings are very high because people are home and in need of entertainment and in need of levity. And so I would say a typical day now, probably, again, like all of you, I have work to find a routine that creates some type of structure in the midst of all of this. So I still do get up, work out, eat breakfast. I'm a big believer in not looking at your phone for that first like 30 to 60 minutes after you get up, if possible. And then after breakfast, etc., then you get down to email, tasks, Zoom meetings all day, probably like many of you, phone calls. And a lot of it is, you know, how do we ensure that our business is not only continuing, but also that we're preparing for the future, preparing for having fans, and continuing to give back to our community. Because I think this last 7 months, it's been really important to us to play a role in helping people who are being impacted by COVID-19. It has hit our own 49ers family with the passing of Hall of Famer Fred Dean this past week. So I would say it's a wide variety. Typically it involves putting out fires and trying to see where the next fire might pop up. We want to be proactive as well.
Mm-hmm. And what would you say is your favorite part of your current role and your least favorite part?
Well, my favorite part is winning. My least favorite part is losing. So that's just, I think, how life is when you're at a team. That really is the best and the worst part. And you have to kind of accept that going in. I've worked at a league before. I've worked at a law firm before. And when you're at a league, half the teams win and half the teams lose. And you're on a very even keel. You just want to see good games. If you're at a law firm, you know, obviously you want to win your cases, but if you're watching sports, you're watching it as a fan, you may be rooting for your team. When you're working for a team, you know, you really do kind of live and die with those wins and losses. And I would say if I were to have to pick something other than that on-field outcomes as the favorite and least favorite parts, I would say the favorite part is the people. And I would say the least favorite part, I think there's, you know, a lot of lawyers on here. We all know some aspects of our job are mundane. You know, some parts of it, no matter how sexy it sounds to be the CAO of the 49ers, you're like digging through 600 emails and you're like, this is not sexy. So that would be my least favorite part.
And just, you know, for those that aren't as familiar with your career, tell us just a little bit about, you know, how you arrived in this position. And, you know, do you feel like that was a very deliberate path, or were you just kind of taking it as it came?
It was very deliberate. I had a clear vision from about age 18 or 19 that I wanted to work in football. And then a pretty clear vision from about 23, 24 that I wanted to be the general counsel of an NFL team. So I started at UCLA as the football beat writer for the UCLA Daily Bruin, which is a paper with a circulation of 50,000. I fell in love with football, covering the team, and really felt like this is where I want to be. This is what I want to work in. And so from there, and I had a lot of very formative experiences, I would say, as the first female beat writer that they'd had on the student paper for football. And from there, worked in PR and media for a couple of years, but then decided to go to law school, went to Stanford for law school, and really was very clear, even in law school, that I wanted to be the GC of an NFL team. And a lot of people told me, like, oh, that's cute. Like that's very ambitious. Perhaps you should, you know, broaden your goals, because that will be very hard to attain. But I was very driven and very focused in how I chose firms that I worked for, and then ended up at the NFL League office in New York for a couple of years, working on player contracts, salary cap, the collective bargaining agreement, and then was recruited from there to the San Francisco 49ers, and I'm now in my 10th season.
And why football? You know, you said you sort of knew that football was where you wanted to be, but why?
It's the greatest game, in my opinion, that exists on earth. I think that there's no other game that is both a chess match sort of mentally and is as physical as our game is. So there are obviously tremendous athletes in every type of sport. I also think that our game is unique and special because so many different body types can play in our game. Right? Like a basketball player, you know what a basketball player looks like. You know what a soccer player looks like. But a football player could be a 300-pound, 6'5" offensive lineman, or it could be a 5'10", 190-pound corner. You know, like you have all different types of people playing such unique roles. I just think it's the greatest sport in the world.
And even though you were obviously very directed and you knew football and you knew the role that you wanted, did you intentionally then also seek out mentors in that space that you thought could be helpful to you? And, what's the best advice that you've gotten over the years?
Yeah, I did seek out mentors pretty intentionally, and not always through a formal mentoring program. I think that for me, at least, the best way to find mentors has been to look around and say, who are the people that I admire who are somehow in my orbit, whether they're in my company, perhaps I've met them at an event or I've seen them speak or whatever it might be. Perhaps, we work together somehow. So like one of my first mentors was actually a woman who worked at Fox Sports West when I was in college. And I still remember the first day she showed up to practice. It was her first day at Fox Sports West. And she sat next to me at practice. I think she saw there was one other woman there and, figured I would be a friendly face and started asking me questions about the team. And she ended up being incredibly helpful to me, recommending that I intern at Fox Sports West, helping me get an internship there. So it's that kind of like kindness of strangers sort of that I think can develop when you're open to talking to people, open to building relationships. I was probably more intentional as a young law student, selecting the firms that I worked at. I had written a law review paper on a particular case, and the attorney who had argued that case, I went to meet with him to interview to summer at his firm, and we hit it off, talked for like 45 minutes. He has been a mentor to me ever since. I ended up summering there and never working at that firm as a lawyer, and he's still my mentor. It was his birthday like a week ago, and I emailed him on his birthday. Like, he's just an incredible person. I think, again, when you click with somebody, it's not different than any other relationship, right? Like, some aspect of it needs to be organic, and like every relationship, it has to be tended to. So you need to be willing to put in energy to it, because I certainly find now, as I mentor more young people and continue to be mentored by others, these are always two-way relationships. So each side needs to be giving in those relationships. And in terms of advice that I've received, two pieces kind of stick out to me from former mentors. One being Anastasia Danius, who was, at the time when I was working at the league, I think she was a vice president in the legal department. She's now the general counsel of Major League Soccer. And she said to me, and I was sort of complaining at that point about something that was happening at work. And she said, no one wants to hear your problems. You have to bring a solution. And it was, in fact, some of the best advice I've ever received, because what it did was give me a tool that every time I had a problem, instead of thinking, how am I going to bring this problem to my boss? It made me stop and go, okay, what are all of the possible outcomes here? What is the best possible outcome I can imagine? What's the solution that I want somebody else to implement? How do I then present the problem and solution together to them and convince them to seek that solution or help me implement that solution? So that's been very helpful and powerful for me. And then the second piece was from Patty Inglis, who's one of my mentors at the 49ers. And she said, sort of the way that you know that you're growing as an attorney, as an executive, is that the things that sort of keep you up at night ratchet up over time, right? So like the first time I did one of our sponsorship deals for Levi's Stadium, which was in my first year there, and I was still in many ways a very baby lawyer, that, kept me up at night. Now, I don't even do those deals anymore. Somebody else is doing them. And along the way, it was like, oh, these are like a piece of cake, right? So I think as we all look at our own growth, we can see, how does it ratchet up? The thing that stresses you out, that keeps you up at night, how is that expanding and growing? So I'd say those are some of the good pieces of advice I've received.
Well, and being in football and the law, it's like a twofer in terms of being in, male-dominated industries, especially at the higher levels. And, there's been a lot of conversation lately about what it's like to be the first, what it's like to be the only, or even just one of a few. Right. And, the pressures that come with that. And, do you feel those pressures when, I'm sure frequently, you're the only woman in the room?
So I don't feel the pressure of being the only person in the room, in part because I can't see myself. So when no one in the room looks like you actually sort of forget for a moment that you're different until somebody says something that makes it very apparent that they can see that you're different. And I don't feel pressure in the sense of impressing the people in that room because A, I know I belong at the table and in the room. B, I love competition. Like I thrive on high pressure. So for me, that's like, great, this is exciting. I think where I feel the pressure is the pressure to open the door to the room and find more chairs and bring more people to the table. That's where I think the pressure comes in. Because that is not easy to do, right? It's not easy to effectuate a larger change. And I think that's one of the things for all of us who kind of reach these stages is that we have spent a decade or 2 decades getting to where we are, right? Trying to get ourselves to the table and to the room. And that's hard enough, but it's a hell of a lot easier than trying to change the whole system. And that's when you realize when you get there, you're like, oh, it's not enough for me to be here. I need to help change the whole picture, right? And that's where I think the bigger challenges are, but very satisfying challenges as well.
And, you've obviously gotten some good advice, but like you say, now you're in the room. What is the advice that you're giving to those coming up that you're now mentoring?
Yeah, I do think a lot of it is very specific to individuals because everybody's really different and needs coaching in different ways. But one of the things that I always advise people is that you do have to develop the mental toughness for this, right? Like you are going to have bad days, and you have to have the resilience to get back up and come back the next day. And so that's where I do think understanding that toughness isn't being hard on yourself, but actually being kind to yourself. So for example, let's say you have a terrible meeting, somebody really makes you feel very small in this meeting. It's totally fine for you to leave that evening and be like, I need to hang out with my girlfriends and, I guess in another, I don't know, FaceTime with them. You can't go have wine with them anymore. And just like kind of recoup, regenerate, ensure that you kind of have gotten back to who you are and taken a break. Maybe you go to bed early that night, but the next day, like you have to go back in there and you have to be willing to deal with that person and think through what is my strategy if this is an ongoing situation. So like those are the types of things. So the short version of that is like you have to get up the next day. You have to go back at it. You have to practice. And you have to really just develop that toughness. That it's not going to be easy. It's going to take a lot of hard work. But if you really want it and you're willing to put that in, then it will be there for you.
Well, and you sort of, in your example, I think you sort of outed yourself a little bit on one of my other questions that you are clearly an extrovert because, you clearly are recharging with people. Whereas my recharging would be like to curl up in bed and like not speak to anyone for a while. But how do you think, being an extrovert, like how does that inform your leadership style and, sort of where you get your energy?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the things that's really important for everybody on their path to whatever their version of success is to know themselves. And so knowing how you gain energy, whether you're an introvert or an extrovert and where you are on that spectrum, right? Because it's a spectrum. It's not, people are not just one or the other, is important because the better we know ourselves, the more effective we are. So for me, as you noted and observed through my example, I am an extrovert. And that doesn't mean that I'm so far to the extroversion side that I don't need some alone time, right? There is some aspect of recharging that I do by myself, but you're right. I gain energy from other people. Like I'm hyped this morning to be on this Zoom with you because I was like, oh yeah, I get to talk to another person. And hopefully you sort of see all 200 of you in here. So for me, I know that about myself. So I can build in time with friends, time with family, etc. For people who are introverts, you may need to build into your day that quiet time where you, Courtney, get to curl up with that book in bed for an hour at night. And that's how you recharge and come back to the table. And in terms of leadership style, I think that both introverts and extroverts can be great leaders. I think that there is a bias in our society and in our work culture towards extroverts. And so I think as an extrovert who's a leader, I have to be very attuned to, are my people, are some of them introverts, where are they on that spectrum? So that I'm also ensuring that they have a voice at the table, because those of us who are extroverts can sometimes just dominate the conversation in the meeting, et cetera. And so we have to make sure we're creating space for introverts, because they are bringing a lot to the table as well.
Mm-hmm. And, what is, you sort of building on that, what does work-life balance mean to you? Do you believe that such exists? And, how do you achieve that?
So I believe we only have one life. So the idea that there is work and there is life, that there are two separate things that we are somehow putting on a scale, like, blind justice, is just false. And so I really encourage people to look at themselves and their lives as a holistic person. And the same thing when we were just talking about leadership, like no one on my team, no one that I work with is just some work automaton, right? Whatever is going on in their personal life is influencing their work. And the same for me, whatever's going on in my personal life is influencing my work. And so understanding that we are whole people, I think from a work culture perspective, and we're certainly facing this in a new way now in this pandemic, we have to make space for people to determine, to the extent that they can, and we're very lucky for all of us who are attorneys, that we work in a job that is fairly flexible in terms of where you can be, when you can be there. We could get work done on a laptop at night. There are a lot of people who can't do that. People who work in grocery stores can't do that. Doctors can't do that. Teachers can't do that. We're incredibly fortunate. So for those of us who can shape more family-friendly work environments, I think that we have a responsibility to do that. And I guess I would just say that for me, it's about how do I fill my life as much as possible with all the things that bring me joy. And for me, my work brings me joy, but also traveling, seeing friends, being with family, exercising, eating great food, reading good books. Like these are all things that bring me joy. And so I don't think about it as, oh, I have this many hours in the day for this, and this many hours for work, and this is a conflict and a battle. And I mean, I'm somebody, I work in football. I've missed many Christmases and many Thanksgivings and all of that. But to me, that's not like, I'm not bitter about that. I'm just choosing things I love and finding ways to prioritize.
Yep. And along the way, we always talk about how you learn from your mistakes. And can you think of a mistake, we've all made them, that you feel like was really impactful or set you on a different path?
That's a great question. I make mistakes all the time, so I'm like, gosh, how do I choose just one? Because I think that it's hard for me because I try to look at life with like zero regrets. So everything is sort of like, it's not a loss, it's a lesson. So I'm trying to think sort of what would be a mistake. I guess I will give one example, which is when I worked at the NFL in New York, it took me months to sort of recognize fully and address that I had a direct supervisor who was pretty directly like sabotaging me, like excluded me from every meeting, literally didn't talk to me for months, and made my life very challenging to the point where other people sort of had to intervene and say something needs to be done about this. And as direct and assertive as I seem now, I was not directive and assertive in that situation. And that was a mistake to let that go on for so long. And I think the mistake I was making is that I am a people pleaser by nature, which is something many extroverts suffer from, right? We want to be liked. And so I so wanted this man to like me. I wanted his approval. I wanted his validation. I wanted to prove to him that whatever it was he didn't like about me, I could, be better, do better. And that was a mistake and a complete waste of energy because there was actually nothing that I could do that was going to make this man happy. And other people really had to tell me that before I could finally accept it. And once I did, I was free. Once I did, other doors opened up for me. The 49ers recruited me. All these great things happened. And I was able to take that emotional weight off because when somebody is sort of repeatedly breaking you down, eventually you start to doubt yourself as well. You start to say, oh, maybe I am dumb. Like and so that was starting to happen. And so I think the mistake I made was not kind of A, recognizing my own people pleaser tendencies, and B, not addressing the situation as quickly as I could. And so I'd say what I learned from that was to address situations more directly, let go and recognize if somebody really doesn't like me, if there's nothing sort of tangible that they can point to, but my existence is an annoyance to them, then I need to let that go.
Mm-hmm. And, you know, now that you've been with the 49ers for several years, I think I know your answer to this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. You know, what are you most proud of? You know, of all the things that you've worked on with the organization?
I don't know what your answer is going to be. Well, now I feel like we're playing the newlyweds game. We'll see. Right, Courtney. Counsel and their clients. That's going to be a new newlyweds game I'm going to start.
Ooh, I'll be your first guest.
Okay. I love it. So I would say, in terms of tangible accomplishments, Levi's Stadium.
That's what I thought you were going to say.
Okay. Ding, ding, ding. Those are clients. Yeah. The blood, sweat, and tears that goes into building a stadium is a lot. It's the coordination of so many different people and entities. And when you do that ribbon cutting and you see the construction workers who worked on it and the people who put the furniture into the building and everybody, all the lawyers who worked on the legal documents and all the financiers who gave you the money to build it and everybody coming together and all the fans who can't wait to fill that building with life and energy, it's so special. And I would say the other accomplishment I'm really proud of is the team that I have built. I think I have great people who really at this point, you know, make my job so much easier because they are capable of doing so much great work, whether it's in the community, in public affairs, in legal. So I would say those are my two greatest accomplishments.
And one of the questions that we got from our participants, which I'm curious about, is, you know, a lot of players have superstitions or rituals that they observe on game day. Do you have any?
So I don't have superstitions because I am well aware that nothing I do is going to change the outcome of the game on the field. So I don't like wear the same socks or anything. But I do probably have rituals, which have shifted a bit, you know, in this time period. I used to always go get my hair done before the game. That was like my ritual. And I also have a pregame playlist that I create every season. So I, you know, roll in listening to my music. I like to be there like 2.5 to 3 hours early, make sure everything is set up for any guests that we have, do a lap around the field early. So I do definitely have rituals, but I wouldn't call them superstitions. I don't think, if anything, you know, if my hair is messed up, we're not going to lose the game. So those would be my rituals.
One thing that you have been partnering with Nixon Peabody on is the Move the Needle Fund, which, you know, for those outside the firm, you know, is a creation of Diversity Lab. And the goal is to create a more diverse and inclusive legal profession. And there are firms like Nixon Peabody that have partnered with, you know, this who's who list of GCs like you, on that initiative. And, you know, can you just spend a minute on, you know, why you felt that that initiative in particular was important and important for you to be a part of?
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. And thank you to your firm for participating, because I think the law firm participation is so crucial. And so I really applaud you guys for putting that effort forward, for making that commitment and being accountable. The reason it's important to me is that we really still do not see in most, you know, counsel who get pitched to companies like ours, diversity when people come in the door. And one of the biggest ways that we as a company can improve diversity across our nation is the way that we spend money, right? Our power is in our pocketbook. And so that's true for us as a whole organization. And then for me as the general counsel, as any general counsel of another company, our power would be in our particular budget, right? Which is what we generally spend on outside counsel is going to be the majority of that. And so we really need to think about, how are we spending our money? Are we doing it with firms that have diversity as a priority and can really demonstrate that in their partnership track, in their associates, in their pipeline, and who are actually working on our matters? So it's one thing for people to say, oh, here's our pretty little piece of paper that tells you what we're doing. It's another for me to look at my bill and see who's working on my matters, and does that reflect the diversity of America? Are half the people on here women? Are 30 to 40% of the people on here people of color? And so I think that that's important because it's the way that we can influence change. And so I'm really happy that law firms like yours are stepping up to participate in that commitment, because we know that we need to see change. We know that, more than half of law students are women. And so to see so few women partners at firms this late in the game, right? It's 2020. Like this is not, when RBG was in law school. Like if we haven't made more progress in the last 50 years, then it's alarming and something that we need to address. So I'm very excited to participate. And again, just thank and applaud you guys for participating as well.
Well, thank you. So I want to talk about your book, which is awesome. And thank you for my copy.
You're very welcome.
So just to sort of set the scene, because I'm pretty sure that everyone participating in this call needs this, and will want to have it after this call. It is a great stocking stuffer, perfect size. Tell us just a little bit about the concept, why you decided to structure this as a guided journal.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you that it really stemmed out of having conversations like this, where when we're in real life, there would be so many people who wanted to talk afterwards. And I found myself giving them exercises. And also when I was doing keynotes, I hate just talking at people. I want it to be interactive. And so I was, again, giving people exercises. And not only did they want more of that, but I had more exercises to give. And I know that I've been to a million TED Talks, et cetera, where I'm like, oh, that was awesome, my life has changed. And then 2 weeks later, nothing has changed in my life. And the reason, and there's actually, ironically, a TED Talk about why TED Talks don't change your life, is that you don't put it into practice.
Mm-hmm.
That is what you have to do to make real change in your life. Like I could tell you all the things that I've done in my life, and that wouldn't change your life, because until you put lessons into practice that mean something to you, it's just not going to happen. And so that's why for me, when I thought about what would be useful, I know that journaling has been something that's a very powerful tool in my own life, something that anybody can implement. What I love about journaling is it's free. It's available to anyone. You don't need special training. You need a piece of paper and a pen. You could even use your phone if you wanted, or, the book and a pen. And you could do it in 5 minutes a day. And so that's why it's really broken down into these small 6x9 pages where it's prompted for you. You don't have to stare at a blank page and think, oh God, what am I going to write? You're responding to prompts. It takes you 5, maybe 10 minutes a day. If you really want to spend time with it, curl up with your book and spend 15 minutes a day. But I wanted it to be accessible. I wanted it to be something that anybody could use, and something that's truly useful. So for me, I'm a worker bee, right? Like a workbook to me is more useful than a long, 400-page tome about my lessons in leadership. Not that I won't someday write that, because I might, and then I'll be back here like, okay, that 400-page tome though, you should really also stuff that in your stocking. In the meantime, I think the workbook is the right way for people to dive in.
And explain a little bit about, so the title of the book is Season of Change, and it is, a football metaphor in terms of how it's structured and how the chapters develop. So explain a little bit about, how you settled on that. I mean, football is obviously important to you. but it's such an amazing way to walk people through this exercise, even, non-athletes among us. So what was the inspiration for that, and why did you feel like that really crystallized your vision for this?
Yeah, well, thank you. I'm glad that it spoke to you. I'm a non-athlete myself. I grew up dancing. So I know as a woman who wasn't an athlete that football's lessons still apply to everyone. Because really, like, football has taught me so many of my life lessons. And so the fact that it's structured in that manner, it's, again, not meant to exclude, right? This is not a book for football players. This is a book for everyone, because I know that football does apply to everyone, that what we learn is something that any of us can implement. And I think the book, it had to be authentic to me. And so for me, this was sort of just naturally the way. Of course, you start with scouting and Film Don't Lie and self-scouting, and then you move to vision, and then you move to your game plan, and then you move to your roster and your team. Now, in real football, you would never put together a game plan for your roster, but in life, it makes sense as the order of operations. And so for me, it was just, this is kind of how I see and experience the world. And so it was just sort of natural. And I think the good thing is it still speaks to people who that's not their world, because these, sports analogies, there's a reason that we all use them in leadership and all these other places, right? Because they're highly applicable. Team sports are in fact a great metaphor for the way life, and definitely the place that workplaces work.
And, even though each chapter has, as you mentioned, kind of a slightly different focus, throughout every day, you start with gratitude. Why is that such a point of emphasis for you?
Yeah, I know, that a lot of people talk about gratitude. And so at the risk of kind of repeating the importance of gratitude, for me, again, from a bit of a sports perspective, it's all about shifting your mindset and creating where your focus needs to be. So if I am having a bad day, if I am frustrated about something that may in fact be quite petty, but is driving me crazy, like, some dispute I'm having, whether it's with a spouse or with opposing counsel in some matter, if I start my day focused on the fact that, wow, all 4 of my limbs are here and working. I am here breathing. Like, it's actually a beautiful sunny day in California. Like, immediately my entire perspective has changed. And the way that I'm going to approach problems, etc., is shifted. I'm no longer emotionally drawn into those situations because I'm able to step back and recognize the big picture. So for me, that's why gratitude is so important and such a great way to start the day. And it's been shown that thinking about things that you're grateful for makes you a happier person. Like, this is sort of just basic scientific research, and I don't know why anybody wouldn't want to be a happier person. So that is one of kind of those 3 daily practices that you build up to and that I use every day in my own life.
And so obviously you have probably gone through many cycles of, this exercise. And the last chapter is focused on the practice, that, as you say, it doesn't stop at the end of the 8 weeks.
Right.
How do you continue to incorporate this into, your daily life? Are you formal about it or informal about it?
I'm pretty informal about it at this point. I mean, I suggest to people that they think of it just like going to the gym. Like, whatever it is that you use to get yourself to exercise. And I know some people are like, I don't go to the gym. So let me give you some tips for both journaling and going to the gym, which is schedule it. The power of the calendar is awesome. Whatever it is that you need to make room for in your life, and this ties back to your work-life balance question earlier, you need to put it on your calendar. Like, the TV show that you want to watch, you have to put that on your calendar, just like you would put a call for work on your calendar, because that's your time for you. And the same thing goes for journaling and going to the gym. You need to make sure that that time has already been carved out, because nobody wakes up in the morning with no, schedule for the day and goes, oh, I think I want to work out. Like, if you didn't already put that into your calendar, there's not going to be time for it. And the same thing with journaling. If this is something that's new for you, I suggest that you pick a time that feels good to you. For me, I'm somebody who journals when I wake up in the morning. I occasionally will journal before I go to bed at night. Some people, just like the gym, they might do it on their lunch break. But I would suggest finding a time that's consistent every day. The other thing that's great for both journaling and the gym is accountability partners. So if you have trouble doing either one of these things, I highly suggest that you decide to do the book or working out with somebody else. And again, even if you're not there in person, it doesn't mean that you and your spouse both have to be journaling at the same time in bed, but maybe you have a friend and once a week you guys are going to check in and be like, hey, did you finish week 1? Let's talk about like what we each learned. So those would be my tips.
Well, and it's funny because, I think of journaling as this very solo exercise. And honestly, it gives me sort of nightmares back to like the teenage years, of like the blank book and too much time to think. But the idea of sort of doing this with someone, and sort of working through it together and then discussing, I think would just be awesome because, then you get that accountability of saying out loud, not just in your book, what some of these goals are and what some of these action items are that you've identified.
Yeah, and I recommend for that reason, even doing it in like a book group, whether you meet once a month or at the end of 8 weeks or whatever, or whether you have like an individual girlfriend once a week. At some point in the next few weeks around November 17th, I am going to put out like a book group study guide for it. So that there's like discussion questions so that you can do it in a group.
That's awesome. Well, and staying with sort of the group theme. So week 4 is all about team. And one of the things that struck me about that and sort of your guidance at the outset of that chapter was the notion that in your life, you can cut people from your team, which is not something I had really honestly thought about, but I can see the importance of that. And as you go through that chapter, you can sort of, you get the help kind of identifying the contributors and the not so contributors. But why is that important, to affirmatively cut people from your team?
It's as important as the people that you bring on your team. So, right, like your team has who's on it, but if the wrong people are on your team, that can like ruin your entire game plan, right? That can ruin your life. And so if you have people who are bringing bad energy into your life, who are, putting you down, who are not supportive of your dreams, who are, there are certain people who are narcissists, for lack of a better word, right? The whole world revolves around them. They're sort of sucking your energy towards them all the time. If you are finding that there are people like that in your life, you're going to need to cut them from your team. And just like if there is a player who's not performing, you are going to have to cut them from their roster. Or if the person is a Cancer on the team, right? If there's somebody who is like, backbiting and creating a bad vibe on that team, that person's got to go. And so it's the same thing in your life. And I know that people are always like, yeah, but I can't cut my mother-in-law from the roster. Like that's not an option. I can't be like, oh, you've been terminated. Your contract is up. So I understand that there are certain people, especially those who are either family members or perhaps colleagues that you don't have the power to fire, that you can't literally remove from your interactions, but you can cut them from your team mentally, right? You can recognize this is not one of the people on my team and my roster. I'm going to find a way to deal with this person, but I know who they are, and I know what energy I'm going to choose to put towards this person who maybe is an opponent. Maybe they're the coach of the other team, right? So sometimes it's just about the mental framing.
Well, and another thing, along those lines in week 5, there is this bulletin board exercise, which I really liked because I'm very visual, and it really helped me to sort of see how to categorize the information and the feedback that is coming your way. So can you just talk a little bit about that and, sort of what the goal of that exercise is. Because it seems to me you can certainly do it on paper, but that's also something you can just do, in your daily life, kind of as it's coming at you.
Yes. Yeah. And that's right, is to be able to then incorporate that in the way that you're always taking in information. So in that chapter, we talk about the bulletin board because traditionally before the internet, you would have literal clips that you would cut out of the newspaper. And if another opposing coach or opposing team talked bad about you, you would pin it to the bulletin board in the locker room, and you would use that as motivation, as a way to say, oh yeah, I'm gonna get up for this game, I'm gonna get them back. And I love it because it's so true in our lives. So I say there's sort of 4 categories of information. One, the easiest, is warm fuzzies, right? It's when we get that positive feedback that makes us feel good. And that's great. And because we've gone through the exercise of kind of knowing ourselves, we're not using that to validate who we are, but we are saying, wow, that's really nice. I appreciate it. I enjoy it. And maybe I'm going to save some of those for when I am having those bad days, right? To kind of get that pick me up. The other 3 are the more negative types, right? So we have constructive criticism, which again, if we've already gone through the exercise of knowing who we are, then we know pretty quickly what is constructive criticism. And this is probably the most important thing to be able to distinguish, because some people, they fail because they don't want to hear it. And so they say, that's not me, that's not true about me. But if we really know ourselves, and when somebody else says something that we know deep down inside, like, that is true, I should probably work on that, then we can use that. And then the second or the third type is the bulletin board material, right? The things that somebody says that we can use to motivate us. So for example, when you were asking me earlier about being the only woman in a room, for me, that is bulletin board material, right? I'm motivated, I'm fueled. And then the last category is noise. So the gentleman I was telling you about before, who would literally like leave only me off of an email with like funeral information for our coworker and put everybody else on it. His behavior was noise. There was nothing useful that I could gain from any information that he was giving me, because it wasn't constructive criticism and it wasn't fueling me anymore, right? It was literally just sort of pulling life energy out of me. It was negative. And I really need to say, oh, that's noise. I need to tune that out. So if we can categorize those, not only on that page in that exercise, but then on an ongoing basis, it's very liberating.
Well, and I think what's so amazing about this book is just how concrete it is, but also specific to the individual that's going through the exercise. Because so many times you hear sort of these general statements about, what we should do differently and, how to inspire other people, but it's not specific enough. Whereas, this exercise, it really, even like you say, even if you only spend 5 minutes, just having to go through this exercise every day, I'm up to week 4, is really eye-opening. And certainly everyone's responses would be different, but sort of the process is the same, which is so cool. One of the questions that we have in the portal is shifting back a little bit to mentorship, but similarly, we talk about mentorship a lot. We talk about sponsorship a lot and what the differences are. But in terms of both being mentored and, sort of how you've sought that mentorship, but also how people have approached you, how it is a very proactive relationship, on both sides. How have you engaged sponsors? How do you ask someone to be your mentor or be your sponsor?
Well, I think they're different, right? And so to just finish for a second, and we do talk about this a little bit in the book, is a mentor is essentially a coach, right? Is somebody who is giving you guidance. And I think the best mentors are really asking you questions. They're not telling you what to do and how to solve your problems. They're giving you, like my friend Anastasia, they're giving you tools, not answers. And so I think for developing those relationships, you can ask directly. Although I always think of it sort of as like, if someone were to, slide in your DM, I know Courtney's already married, but and be like, oh, I want to be your husband, Courtney. You'd be like, whoa, take me on a date first. It's really the same thing with mentors, right? Like if you're like, hi, I don't know you at all, but I would like you to mentor me. It's like, okay, well that's, a fairly time intensive relationship. Like, I think I'd like to get to know you first and see if I want to do that. I think, again, like, I was giving the example of the date. The easy thing to do is to ask, like, hi, I would love to have coffee with you or have a Zoom with you. I would love to do a 15-minute informational interview with you over the phone when you have time. Like, I'm available all these times or however. And you want to kind of build that relationship step by step. I think that sponsorship is very different because a sponsor is somebody who advocates for you when you're not in the room. That's the person who says, oh, who should really get to pitch that potential client is Courtney, even though Courtney's not in the room for that conversation. And I think it is harder to ask somebody, hey, if you ever hear of anything, could you please, boost my name up there? That's something that you have to already have an established relationship. No one can advocate for you without knowing what your work product is, without knowing who you are, right? Because they're staking their reputation on you. So I think oftentimes sponsors are very organic. It's based on, what their experience of you is and their willingness to do that. That said, I do think that we can ask people that we do know, and we can create a culture around us by doing this ourselves, to say, hey, if you do hear of any companies, like, for example, you can even do this with me, right? If you, Courtney, say, hey, Hannah, if there's any other teams in the NFL that are looking for immigration counsel, I would love if you thought of me, right? You're asking me to be your sponsor. And so that's something that we can all do. And frankly, that we all need to do, right? To advance, when we're talking about how do we get more women into partnership positions, we need rainmakers, right? We need people to be willing to advocate for themselves, to ask others to advocate for them. And it's fine. And I'm happy to do that because I know your work product, because you've done amazing work for me for years. So in that way, it's organic and it's natural. And so I think there are those opportunities. It's just that they're fairly specific, right? We want to think of a situation in which we have a specific ask for somebody, where we know that they have access to people that we would like them to speak about us to.
Yeah. And I think that's hard. I mean, I think, people struggle with that ask sometimes, but I think it's also a mistake to just assume, well, people know what I do, so therefore, I don't have to ask. I don't have to advocate in any way because, people know, and they would just automatically think of me. And I don't think, that passive approach is always best either.
Totally agree with you. I can think of an example. Just in the last week, I've had maybe 2 times where people have come to me for ideas for people to hire for different roles. And I was like, oh, shoot, I have 2 or 3 people on my mind, but I know that there's more, but I can't remember who they are. And I was like, this is why it's important that people do that intermittent outreach, that do let you know every once in a while, hey, I'm still open to these type of roles, whatever it might be, so they're on your mind. Because it's not that people don't want to help. Like you said, if you assume, oh, well, Hannah knows my work, but Hannah is not top of mind, like that's the problem, is people know your work, they like you, but it's just not the first thing that is on their mind. They're not going to think of it the way that you are, right? No one is sort of our better advocate than ourselves. Generally or hopefully. So you're right. I do think that you do need to be proactive on that piece of, and sometimes it's just checking in. It's not even necessarily making a specific ask, but it's making sure that you are staying in touch with people so that when somebody does ask, oh, who's the best immigration counsel? I go, oh, I just got an email from Courtney the other day. Courtney's the person.
Mm-hmm. And I think at junior levels too, people don't necessarily appreciate that they can still do that, that seeking the work that you want, instead of just being the receiver of the work that comes your way, you have more agency than you think maybe. And I'm sure, you've sort of had this like laser-like focus on where you wanted your career to go, but it wasn't just going to come to you, even though you knew that's what you wanted.
Definitely not. No. And I think you make a great point. I think people have a lot more power than they think they have. And honestly, when people are like, oh, how did you get where you are? Because I used every ounce of not only my own effort, but I took advantage of every opportunity, right? I sought that out. I utilized every bit of power, influence, anything that I had, I was using. And so I do think a lot of people go, oh, I just, we don't have the power to do that. I don't, I can't change anything. Well, that attitude, you sure can't. Like, and I see it happen all the time. I see it happen also in the way that people organize groups in offices, affinity groups, things like that. People have so much more power, especially collectively, than they think that they have.
Yeah. So I want to do sort of the fun part of this interview, which is
Was this not fun?
Our quick fire questions.
Okay.
So you know how this works. I'm going to ask you a question, and you just, first thing that comes to mind, just, a little bit more about you. And I'm not taking credit for all of these. So let me just put that out there first. Okay. What was your first job?
Watering my neighbor's lawn.
What's the one thing you cannot live without?
Water.
What's your favorite place on earth?
Oh, St. Martin's or the Blue Coast in France.
Okay. What's your favorite meal?
Pizza, burgers, ice cream. Can that be all in one meal?
Sure. Yeah, that could be one big meal. And I think we sort of covered this one. Have you always been a football fan?
No.
Explain.
I didn't start watching football until I was in high school.
So see, you can come to it late.
Yep.
And look where it landed
Too
you.
old.
Well, I want to thank you for taking the time to do this with us today. This was really fun. And I hope that everyone will consider this as a stocking stuffer, or just as, especially as we're all at home. And, this is sort of a brave new world that we're living with. It's not a bad time for some reflection. And you certainly could not have titled this book better to come out in 2020.
I know, little did I know.
But for those that are interested, we're going to put the information on where you can get the book in the chat. And also, we'll be sending everyone an email after this with a link to the program for people that want to share it or listen again. That'll include this information. But for those that want this like right now and want to pre-order, you can get it at hannah-gordon.com/book, bookshop.org, and Barnes & Noble and Amazon. So I encourage everyone who participated today to put themselves through this season of change. It's really interesting, and just a different way of, journaling and asking yourself some tough questions in a very empathetic kind of a way. So I appreciate the opportunity to get this a little early and get a head start. So thank you. And thank you very much for your time and for being part of our Let's Talk series.
I'm so glad I could do this. This was really fun, Courtney. I look forward to seeing everybody in person at some point.
Yes.
And thank you so much.
And for everyone participating, this, as we mentioned, it is part of a series, and we will be doing this again in November 17th. Tammy Duckworth, Senator from Illinois, is going to be doing the same program with us. So stay tuned for more information about that. And thanks, everyone, and have a great day. Bye, Hannah.
Bye. Thank you, everyone.